Hi, and welcome back to the latest edition of Chapter Two's Talent Ed podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Hessie Coleman, the Vice President of People for SEDNA Systems. SEDNA is a smart team communication software that unifies all messages, data, and documentation to help companies focus on the work that matters. They've had huge success since being founded in 2017. And have doubled the company size over the last 12 months. So we welcome Hessie today to talk about how she's achieved it and what they've got in store for the future. So a big welcome today to Hessie Coleman, who is the Vice President of People at SEDNA Systems. Welcome, Hessie. Thank you so much for joining us on Chapter 2's Talent Ed.
Thank you for having me, Sophie. It's a pleasure.
No problem. It's great to have you here. So we've been talking a lot about SEDNA and how the best way to kind of introduce you. And as we both agree that I'm not going to do it justice, I'll just say that you are here and you're reimagining email. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to you, Hessie, at that point, and you can tell us a little bit more about it and your journey so far.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, as you say, what SEDNA really is doing is reimagining email from the ground up. I think we'd realized that fundamentally, I mean, practically every business out there is using email. It's such a core part of how business is done. But ultimately, it's not what it was designed for. It's this academic protocol like 40 years ago that really wasn't designed to carry commerce today. And I think so many hours are lost and so much time is lost to managing your inbox. And everyone, I think all of us, we've developed these little hacks and workarounds to make it work. And I have to admit, I myself was in the same boat. I'd not really thought about doing it differently because it's such a ubiquitous thing, right? So when I saw SEDNA in action and had a demo when I was first talking to Bill, her founder and CEO, it was like a little light bulb went off in my mind. It was a real kind of aha moment that was like, oh, this is brilliant. Why is nobody doing this already? And it's really cool because what we can do is by kind of taking the problem of email that is so ubiquitous and building up from the ground up. Of actually what this could be, and really building visibility and collaboration into the heart of it. Actually we're able to not just improve on the kind of classic business metrics, things like efficiency, etc., but actually we're saving people time and a lot of frustration. So that's really actually really exciting that people we're saving, I think, on average hours per week for every person or team that's using the system. I know one customer told us recently that everyone in her team saves half an hour a day that they get to go home earlier to spend with their friends and family since they've launched SEDNA, so that makes it really exciting. So to tell you a little bit about me as well, I feel like I've just launched straight into what is SEDNA, but I figure the team can cut this
yeah, no, definitely. Sense. You've been there for it's 2017 it started, didn't it? And you've been there since 2019. So I'm sure you've had a big part to play. We definitely want to hear about you and your background.
Yeah, thanks. I joined SEDNA in early at the start of 2020. So at the end of 2019, we just received some funding. And I came in then at the beginning of 2020. So it was the first leadership hire that was made once we got some funding. So, and that I think really speaks to Bill, our founder and CEO's ethos, that actually the first hire he wanted to bring in was on the people team to actually really help to make sure that SEDNA is not just a great product and doing great things for our customers, but actually also a really great company. That kind of people first mentality really shines through. So to tell you a little bit about my background, so I joined in early 2020 as the first VP of people. I've been in tech for a while. Most recently, I was at Starling Bank, and it was consulting for a while after that with a number of different startups and scale-ups. I started my career in the corporate world. I used to work for a large professional services company, and then was in the energy industry for a while, which gave me a really solid grounding, I think, in best practice, and also a great understanding of actually how enterprises work and communicate at that scale, and tens of thousands of people across the world. But ultimately I found I moved into the startup world after many years in corporate, and kind of never looked back. I found that was very much a better fit for me. I think the pace and agility and culture of a startup really suited me much better.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds as though it's been all systems go since you started. I mean, like you say, Series A in 2020, 2019, 2020, Series B earlier this year. We're talking kind of, headcount, it's doubled since you joined the team. So you're now looking at about 125 strong team, but over 75 hires in the last 12 months. So, you're scaling rapidly, and you've been there for that process. How have you found that?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's been really rapid scaling. We're pretty much into hypergrowth, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot of good there, right? The fact that actually we've been able to continue to attract customers and revenue, bring on new team members, bring on new investment. There's been a lot of real positives during this time. Of course, having joined just at the beginning of 2020, a few weeks in, I think I had about 2 weeks in total in our different offices across the globe, and then a pandemic hit. And we locked down early. We felt it was the right thing to do. But yeah, so having had about 2 weeks in our offices, I basically haven't seen anybody else since for about a year probably, which is quite a change to what I initially imagined I'd be doing when I first went in. But as with all of us, we had to adapt to the changes ahead of us and make sure that we were doing what was right for our people going through what is for many a very, very difficult time. So there've definitely been some real challenges along the way as well, some highly unexpected ones too.
Absolutely. And you talk about kind of the remote working, and I know that you made a move from remote friendly to remote first there at SEDNA. And I'm sure that had a big part to play in the fact that you are an international company, and obviously had people all over the world from day one. So I suppose with that growth that you've experienced over the last 12 to 18 months, how have you gone about that? How have you done that on an international basis? And I suppose what impact did COVID have on that? Was it a challenge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think so yeah, as you say, SEDNA has been international since day one. I think in most cases you often have a kind of HQ, and then as part of an internationalization project, expand into new markets, new territories. We did things slightly differently. We've always had a presence in Canada, in the UK, and in Singapore, which I think in many ways gave us a little bit of a head start when we then suddenly were moving to being all fully remote, because actually, if you're working together with someone, like we might be a few miles apart now, but actually whether we're talking to each other on Zoom from a few miles apart or from a different continent doesn't make that much difference in how we would work together. So there's some things I think that were that translated very well there. I think we've always been quite very flexible. So we talked about being remote friendly before. I guess it's a difference of assumption that if you're remote friendly, which we were, I think, we hired great people, and I think trust is something that's very important to the SEDNA culture as well. So actually trusting people to make the best decisions for themselves and their team as to where and when and how they best get their work done, and juggling that with any other priorities they have in their lives. I think it works much better for us, or it's something that's quite important to us. So we'd always been remote first. Meaning, there was no need to kind of get prior approval if you occasionally wanted to work from somewhere else or different hours, etc. We kind of defaulted to trusting people to make those decisions for themselves. But we were still primarily office focused, though very flexible. So then, yeah, during the pandemic, actually shifting to being really remote first definitely did still bring some changes and some challenges, for sure. I think there is a difference. We were quite fortunate that we had already had this experience of working closely with people that weren't co-located with you. That that was definitely helpful, I think, in that experience. But actually, I think going from doing that occasionally or with half the team being in a different location to everyone's in a different location and you're at home is very different. So I think some of the challenges there, I mean, some were purely practical, like not everyone had a desk at home that they could work from. So actually even just sorting out equipment, making sure people had a good Wi-Fi connection, headphones, microphone, all that good stuff on day one. But some of it as well was more core, I think, in terms of how we work. So something that we'd already had some experience of, I think, having been globally distributed, were things like asynchronous working. So the kind of assumption that I might send you a message, but I don't expect a response immediately. If it's urgent, then that's something else. And there's some things, of course, that make a lot of sense to do. It's synchronized or kind of at the same time, like this conversation, for example. Actually, we could have batted questions back and forth by email, but actually, this is far more fun and nice and pleasant to have a chat with you. So there's some things, of course, that are really valuable to do kind of in sync, but actually for a lot of things, we find that we can actually have discussions and collaborate and work well together in a more asynchronous way, often through long form written communication. So that's something that we've put a lot of work and effort into to make sure that we're able to do that well. I think, even for us, we make a product that is really ideal for collaboration, remote and otherwise. And even then, we've still had to, I think, take a hard look at our own practices and make sure that we're continually adapting. And of course, as with any business, the challenges of scaling up are the same, right? There's what works for you with 50 people isn't necessarily going to be what works with 100, or in future 500 or 1,000. So I think that's one of the facts of being a scale up, really, is that you do have to continually assess and make sure that what you're doing is continues to be the best way to operate, and that you're, I think, that you're continually improving, just as much, I guess, a software principle of continuous improvement as I think one of the culture.
Absolutely. And like you say, just constantly reviewing and understanding that potentially as you go from 60 to 120 people, those existing processes or, tools or whatever it might be may not be applicable anymore, and making sure that you understand that so that you can move forward. I think many scale-ups as well, particularly now with the current kind of post-pandemic climate, might be looking for to expand on an international level, whereas potentially they may not have been before, or potentially it's brought it forward. What would you sort of say in terms of steps that they need to take when you're looking at, going into new markets? I think you said you started in 3 locations, you're now in 10 locations. So what would be kind of, just some fundamental steps that they might need to take to successfully scale in new areas?
Yeah, so leaving aside any kind of legal and compliance considerations, because there are a lot of great solutions coming into the market now that can help to actually employ people in different countries. I think some of the things to think about are, first of all, actually being able to hire people wherever you happen to find the best people, not just limited to where your offices happen to be. That opens up huge opportunities for a company, even for us. And we were very flexible even before the pandemic, and we definitely would have said we were very remote friendly. But actually, even more so now, I think we've realized that we can really operate very, very well, even where we're not co-located at all. So actually taking that constraint out of the question has really opened us up to hiring talent wherever we happen to find the best people, so long as it's in a time, but we look much more as a time zone rather than actual physical location. And that's really opened a lot of doors for us. So I think we now employ people in about 10 countries across the world, which has really opened a lot of great doors in terms of talent markets. Some of the things I think that you do need to consider, though, are communication. Is a big one. How you create feedback loops, how you even give people a chance to socialize. These things that I think kind of happen organically when you've got a bunch of people in a room. I think you do need to think about a lot more intentionally a lot earlier on if you're not physically co-located with the people that you're working with, which I think is something that we've kind of all of us have seen and had to adapt to in the course of the pandemic. But I think if you then add different time zones into the mix, especially, then that does bring some additional considerations that you have to think about. So things like, for example, when meetings are scheduled, and does it really need to be a meeting? Is this something we can work on asynchronously? Especially when you've got all these different time zones in play, that's something that I think it needs to be thought about quite carefully, because you also, it's very easy, I think, to have a kind of scope creep of sorts, where people's hours end up kind of getting extended because, oh, I'm just going to get up early to work with this team, and then, oh, I'll just stay on a little bit later, which that willingness is great, but at the same time actually is not kind of healthy and sustainable, and often also not necessary. I think we've all been conditioned over the years to default to kind of doing things in the moment, which isn't necessarily always the best way that we can do things. So yeah, I would recommend, I think there's huge opportunities in actually being able to support a remote team or a global team really well. But in order to do that, I think, and especially if you've only got a few people in different locations, I think you do need to take a step back and really evaluate how you best do that to make sure that those people also feel included. You don't want to kind of have the core team and the remote people as a kind of them and us, which would be a very easy trap to fall into, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. I think making sure that everyone feels included, even if they're not necessarily based in that main office or near that main office, is a really key thing to think about, and to take steps to make them feel included. However that may be. And you're obviously doing it well. You've got some fantastic, flawless scores. We were having a look on Glassdoor, and you've got 100% likely to refer a friend, 100% likely to recommend the CEO. Like, these are really, really great and very authentic results. Like, it's transparent, it's there, it's the people telling the story for you, I suppose. And something I mentioned to you earlier was about on the website, you'd refer to your team as you recognize that they're parents, you recognize that they might be marathon runners, you recognize that whatever it might be, that they're humans, and there's more to them, I suppose, than just being an employee of SEDNA. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, because I think it's a huge accolade to you, but was that a conscious decision? Was that part of the strategy to maintaining that inclusivity as you grew?
Yeah, I think actually SEDNA is a very inclusive and welcoming place to work, and that's one of the things that I found so attractive about it when I joined. One of the things that I think is absolutely critical that we preserve, that continues to be really within the heart of the culture. I think one of the things that is really nice about SEDNA's culture is the fact that I think it is a very people first place to work. So not just that. We're here to create a product that we're selling and bringing value to our customers, which in itself is actually we're solving some really hard and interesting challenges, and that's part of what makes it quite an interesting place to be. But at the same time, one of the things I think as well that's really important is actually building a really great place that people actually want to work and can do their best work. And I think the culture of SEDNA is something that makes it really special. It is, I think, a really nice balance of both attracting, really talented, fantastic people, but also it's very, very collaborative. Everyone's got time for each other. So although on an individual basis, I think the people of SEDNA can be, hugely impressive. But actually, everyone's got time for each other. And I think because we use SEDNA ourselves, obviously I'm hugely biased here. This is not a plug, but I do find it really nice because a collaboration is such a key part of the value of the SEDNA product. And we can really see it internally ourselves as well. You can see people popping up to ask questions or cheer each other on when something's going well. And it's really that having that very, very visible, I think, is really, really lovely. So then the question then, of course, is how do you maintain that at scale? And I think so part of it, I think, is I think you really need to understand what your culture is. And that's a trickier challenge than I guess it sounds sometimes, because I think it's almost a scale from being too superficial to be meaningful to on one end of the spectrum to the other end, almost being kind of too narrowly defined to the point that actually you create a ceiling for yourself in your scaling, because there comes a point where you're only looking for a very, very narrow target, and can accidentally create a very homogenous workforce if that's if you draw the net too tight. So I think actually taking a really hard look at what the key behaviors are that are common across the business, that are valued, that are promoted, and also where you draw the line as to what's not acceptable are really important things to be able to actually define what the culture is. And of course, it's not going to be identical when you've got 20 people to 50 to 100 to 500, etc. But it needs to be recognizably the same company. So how you really build that into your processes, into your operating procedures, how you actually really live that culture and ensure that continues, I think is something that is really critical, and it kind of informs everything from how you hire to how you reward people to how you make sure, in our case, for example, collaboration is something that's really important, I think, in the culture, which we make a collaboration tool, so you would kind of hope that would be the case, right? Yeah. But it's something that I think is really deeply ingrained, and is really visible. So collaboration, transparency, these are all things that I think are really important in our culture. So making sure that as we scale, we're kind of at that inflection point now where maybe everyone can't really know each other closely, socially, personally anymore. But how do you make sure then that you have the kind of appropriate feedback mechanisms and feedback loops in place that everyone still has the same chance to be heard and have their voice heard, and their ideas, because I think that's part of that transparency and collaboration is really critical, is also part of the reason why I think people often like to join a startup is because they want to feel that their ideas can be heard, that they're respected and valued. So how that continues, I think, as you scale, is definitely possible, but I think it does require a little bit of conscious effort and thought behind it.
Oh, absolutely, it definitely does. It definitely does. Is that something then that you've kept consistent? Have you got the same values and the same behaviours that are kind of linked to those values that you had when you were half the size?
Yes, I think so, definitely. Actually, it's a big the culture was one of the big draws for me in joining the company myself when it was much smaller and much more early days. But a combination of both having a fantastic team and culture in place, as well as a really interesting product that I thought was really going places. It was really what drew me to the company. So I think actually ensuring that we do maintain that culture and keep the things that are so core to who we are as a business is something that I think is going to be a real kind of success factor for us. So yeah, we're quite I think careful about how we manage that. We've very intentionally not used values as the tool that we use to describe how we operate, but that's not to say, of course, that we don't have values or principles or behaviors that we are how we like to act. I think about a year ago, we kind of set ourselves this challenge of articulating what it actually means to work at SEDNA. What is it like here? How do you describe it to your friends? Kind of those kind of questions, try to tease out in people's own words. And what came out was really highly collaborative, passionate people, results-orientated, definitely people first, team players, and fairly humble with low egos. And that's something that was kind of taking people in their own words, but it came out actually the themes came out really strongly across the business, and that's something that we're really careful to ensure that we protect and continue. So that's something that we kind of test regularly to make sure that actually it still applies. So although that articulation is about a year old, and I'm not going to pretend we're going to always use the same words to describe it, I think core themes need to always be there.
And it's good to kind of have those as a core, like you say, so that as you expand outwards, there's that consistency. Especially at the moment as well, the market, I don't know if you're finding the same, but there seems to be kind of a bit of a frenzy, and a lot of kind of clients or colleagues or acquaintances that we're speaking to are feeling it, that sort of post-pandemic rush or whatever it might be that's causing it, that actually the talent market, the talent sector has kind of taken on a whole other level, a whole life of its own. And, it's very competitive and just could be described as fierce. Is that something you're finding? Are you, how can you differentiate yourself? I suppose, I know you've got, you're recruiting all the time, and you've got, particularly in the tech sector as well. How can you kind of make SEDNA stand out, or what kind of message do you want to give to show how you do stand out?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There definitely is, I dread to say, a kind of war for talent, because that's such a cliche, isn't it? But actually,
Yeah.
the competition is fierce right now. Absolutely. I think no, you're absolutely right. Everyone seems to have suddenly I kind of jumped on the hiring spree. So yeah, no, definitely. I think for us, and it's still relatively early days for us, right? Like we got our Series B earlier this year, which is hugely exciting, because that's going to allow us to really accelerate on a lot of the things that we're already starting to do. Included in that, I think, is also actually is telling the stories of the interesting and meaningful work that we're doing, the problems we're solving. And for us, I think, from a kind of, I guess, employee perspective, I think really getting under the skin of why people join us, why they stay with us, and sharing that message, which I think in our case really is ultimately about the culture, about being a really actually a great place to work, somewhere that you can do really interesting, meaningful work and surrounded by great people. Which I think is really important, because there is so much demand, and for great people at the moment, that actually by kind of and we want to be very honest about who we are and what's good and what's not so good, because there are certainly challenges, I think, of being a really fast-paced scale up, and sometimes the time zones can be tricky. I don't want to skirt over these things, but actually there are a lot of positives as well. And that's I think putting that very honest message into the market of who we are, and what it's actually like to work at SEDNA. As you mentioned earlier, the Glassdoor reviews, for example. That's a great way to find out, kind of in people's own words, what it's actually like. And I think that it's such a fiercely competitive market right now. I think people are paying attention to not just the package and the perks, but actually also what they are building. Is it something they believe in? Is it something that they feel is interesting or important? And the people that are in the culture and the company that are going to be working with. So I think that's something that we can really where we can really stand out.
No, you definitely do, and there's no hiding. Certainly on online, there's no with the likes of Glassdoor, etc. It's there for everyone to see. And I think the statistic is something like 75% of candidates now will research a company online before applying for a job. And so in that sense, there is nowhere to hide. And I think the Glassdoor review certainly says it all about SEDNA. So it's a great accolade to you. So just to finish, tell us a little bit about the next 6 months, the next year, what you guys have got in store.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for us at SEDNA. I think at the moment we've just got funding, we've just got the Series B, we've got a $34 million US round led by with funding from our existing investors, and then also led by Insight, who are a really incredible fund. So it's really cool to have this, both the confidence of some really fantastic investors, but also actually to be able to have the money to really accelerate a lot of our growth plans, and a lot of the stuff that we've been really wanting to do. So it's a really exciting time for us. I think we're only going to continue to grow. We've doubled in headcount in the last 12 months. We've been growing rapidly in sales and revenue. I mean, touch wood, but I think that's only going to continue. So I think it's going to be quite a busy time for us, but we've got really ambitious goals. I think there is so much more that we can do to actually help people. So I think poor tooling and email is part of that often, is one of the biggest frustrations in people's working lives. There's so much noise, that actually cutting through that to help them to do the work that matters, not just managing their inbox, is something that I think is only going to be more important. I think as people are really starting to adapt to working remotely or different ways of working. Actually, I think comms and email is really often going to continue to be at the heart of that. So there's a lot I think we can do, and there's going to be a lot that we need to do to get there. So we're going to be growing rapidly, I think.
Like you say, it's kind of more important than ever as we continue on this kind of remote journey. So thank you so much, Hessie. It's been absolutely lovely to have you join me today, and congratulations again on the Series B funding. I wish you all the success, and I'm sure that we'll continue to see SEDNA going from strength to strength. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to have a lovely chat here. It's been a real pleasure.